Let's start by looking at the project we're going to build. I'll go down to my Building, Move, Finish composition, click once in the timeline to make sure that panel is active, and press the spacebar to preview the animation. And you can see I've added some text in front of this panning shot of the apartment building. And while it looks relatively simple, believe it or not, there are some little gotchas that you need to be aware of, especially when you're inserting text into a scene that's kind of as flat as this. So let's go to the Building, Move, Start composition. I'll just double click on that comp. And here you can see I've got my Building, Move video file, and it's just set up like so. Now, usually when I want to insert text into a scene, I'll start by checking out the camera tracker. So I'll click once on that video layer in the timeline. I'll go up under animation and I'll go to the track camera function. That'll apply the 3D camera tracker, and it's going to go ahead and analyze in the background. So what that means is I can go ahead and work on any other compositions back in my project panel if I want to continue working as this analysis is happening. Notice I get a progress status here letting me know how many frames have actually been analyzed. And then once it's actually finished, I'll get a graphic representation of the track points here in the scene. So there they are. Now, notice when I hover over these points in the scene, the target looks extraordinarily flat and extraordinarily large. I'll explain what these points in the target mean in a second, but what I'm going to do is go down here and open the advanced options. And this is what I'm looking at, average error. The fact that this is almost 3 pixels is way too much of an error. So notice the method used is called tripod pan. So what that means is there's no actual depth in this scene. Usually the camera tracker much prefers some type of Z movement on your camera to have a better idea as to the perspective in the scene and the lens used, etc. So I'll come down to the solve method drop down and I'll change it to mostly flat scene. Now notice the average error is only 0.55 pixels. And when I hover my target over top, I'm actually getting some different angles in the scene. Now, since I know this column is relatively flat, what I'm going to do is click and drag a lasso around a bunch of those points like so, and I'll let go. And now you can see my target is locked into that one area, and it looks like it's kind of pasted onto that column. The target allows me to place the text into the scene. So once I have the target, I can hover over the middle of the target. And if I wanted to add the text anywhere else, with the move tool here, I can place the text anywhere else in the scene, but I'm going to go ahead and place it right here where it was. So I'll right click or control click in the center of the target and choose create text in camera. So notice now I have text in here. So I'll go down to my timeline and double click on the T and I'll add our text. Now I know the text is going off the scene, but that's okay. I'll go up and grab my selection tool, and with my text layer selected here, I'm going to go ahead and just make the size of the text smaller. And it doesn't really matter the actual size of the text. I'm trying to place it here in the scene. Now, I want to move the text, but I'll keep my anchor point on this column. So what I'm going to do is press A. And when I slide the anchor point, it's actually going to move the text, and the position of that anchor point is going to stay the same. So here, I'll go ahead and set it up so I've got text kind of like this, and then I'll scrub through and you can see the text will be revealed as the camera move actually happens. But I'm noticing that I don't have much perspective. I'd like this text to actually be out here on the railing. So I'll press P to open up the position here, and I'll scrub on the Z position towards the left to bring it closer towards the camera. And so now when I scrub in the timeline, you can see I've actually got a little bit of parallax that's happening because the text is moving a little bit faster than the background. Now again, if I want to change the placement of the text, I can press A for my anchor point and just slide the text in relation to the anchor point, and notice the position date is going to stay exactly the same. So there we go. I think this looks pretty good, but in order to give this more perspective, I'll add a drop shadow. So I'll select layer 1, I'll go up under effect, I'll go down to perspective, and I'll just add a drop shadow. I could add radial shadow. I could actually add a light into the scene since this is 3D text, but then I would need a shadow catcher, and honestly, that's overkill. So here, I'll increase the opacity of my drop shadow so it's a little bit darker, and I'll increase the distance just by scrubbing on that. And I want it to be a little bit further away, like so. And I'm looking at the shadows here from this balcony above to kind of set the shadows in this area here. And then I'll just go ahead and increase the softness just because I don't want it to be quite so harsh. Now, if I scrub through here, you can see the text could be a little bit more visible and pop off the background. So I'm going to do one more thing and add a little bit more of a shadow into here. So I'm going to go up under layer and I'll choose new solid. And for my solid, I'll make it the comp size, and then I'll change the color, make sure it's nice and black and dark, and I'll click OK. Now with my new solid in the scene, I want it to exist in 3D space. So I'm going to toggle my switches and modes here, and I'll enable 3D for this layer. And then I'll go ahead and position it. So I'll press P to open the position here. And I want you to notice in the parent and link column, if you don't see this column here, you can right click next to the source name and go to columns and make sure that that is actually selected. But here in the parent and link column, I want to go ahead and hold down Shift, and I'll click on the pick whip and I'll point it at the text. And when you hold down Shift and point it at another layer, it'll make that layer move to the position of the other layer. So notice now the position is lined up with the position of this other layer, and I don't need it to be quite so large. So I'll press S to open up the scale, and I'll scale it down. There we go. And I still want it to be able to cover the text. And then I'll go up here and I'll grab my mask tool. So I'm going to click and hold and make sure I grab my ellipse tool. And I'll just click and drag an ellipse around my text, kind of like so. And then I'll open up my mask options here and I'll feather that area. And notice I can see I've got a little bit of text over here. So I'll go ahead and press S to open up my scale, and I'll just scale this up just a little bit. There we go. And now I'll position the shadow underneath my text, and that looks horrendous. So I'm going to go here under my toggle switches and modes, and I'll change the blend mode to multiply so it blends in the background a little bit differently. And then I'll press T to open up my opacity, and I'll bring the opacity down so that it's a little bit like so. Now, in our source, you could see the text was lower. So here, I'm going to go ahead and select my building move start comp, and I want my black shadow to follow the text here. So notice it already is, it's linked. So when I select my text, I can press P. And if I want to just position it down in the scene, I can go ahead and just position it down. And I can select my shadow here, and you notice it also moved down. So now when I scrub through, you can see my text is much closer to the railing, and I have that nice shadow integrated into the background. So I'll click in the bottom of the timeline, deselect all the layers, press the space bar, and here you can see now we've successfully placed our text into the scene, added a little bit more perspective with the drop shadow, and then helped the text pop off of a complicated background by adding our black solid into the scene. So remember, next time you use the 3D camera tracker, you want to make sure that the scene actually has some Z movement. If it doesn't, you want to open the advanced options and just make sure that the error isn't larger than a pixel, and maybe choose one of the other options to see if you can get a better result like we did here.